so the title of this discussion is CMS opens the door for neurotech therapies. And certainly when we look at some of the recent decisions on the non-invasive side, they certainly opened the door, the floodgates to at least one company, but okay, not closed completely, but certainly closed the door a little bit on some others for at least for the moment. So for those that have looked at, if you went into the portal where that has the attendee list, is also a copy of the neurotech reports for the month, and there's an article on CMS about what I'm going to just summarize right now. So if you haven't gotten into the portal to get the attendee list and also that report, and if you're not a subscriber even to the free version, you should send an email in, and certainly encourage you to subscribe to the monthly and the annual report. Someone's omitted. Okay, I'm trying to go forward. It's not moving. I am. That's because you're on Zoom. That one. So today we have Chris Hanna, who's the CEO of Pacific Therapy Access. And then we also have Jim Makis, who's the president and CEO of Makis Research LLC. I've known Jim for 20-something years and was introduced to Chris just recently, thanks to Jim Makis. So what I want to do before we get started in a discussion is just summarize what the recent CMS decisions were, payment decisions for selected non-invasive devices. So as we know, CMS often involves trial data above and beyond what FDA requires. And one example of that, when I used to work at BioNS with the original CEO, they got FDA clearance, and it was very obvious this device worked. It was for a foot drop, and you put it on, and you could see improvement right away. And his perspective was that, well, why do we need to do a separate clinical trial for CMS? And payers, it's like, it's so obvious it works. Well, yeah, it's obvious it works, but he was wrong, and it cost probably several years of a BioNS delayed revenues on the reimbursement side. But last year, the encouraging news that several non-invasive devices received specific HCPCS codes, enabling them to move away from the kiss of death with is being designated as a TENS device. So there was language to separate them from a reimbursement perspective. And these are companies like electroCore, Thoronica, NeuroRelief, CalaHealth, and others. And then in 2022, I think this was in June, even though CMS assigned HCPCS codes distinct from TENS, they decided from a reimbursement perspective to group them as TENS, meaning $400 to $500. So the companies around the table at the time appealed that decision, and I want to share with you, and this is all very recent, what some of those, the final decision from CMS is. So the companies argued, well, we have very little in common with TENS, transcutaneous electrical stimulation. These are much more complex indications, complex devices, and the CMS bought some of the arguments, but not others. And so just last month in October, should be 2022, CMS issued a final decision. So we're going to look at that final decision, and it's not moving forward again. What do I need to do? Oh, here we go. So NeuroSigma, and I'll just summarize a little bit about the companies. So this is an indicator. In fact, NeuroSigma is going to be presenting remotely, is it, or in person? NeuroSigma later. Okay, great. So for the treatment of pediatric ADHD in kids 7 to 12, who aren't currently taking ADHD medication, they had a specific HCPCS code for that. But unfortunately, in terms of a reimbursement level, CMS rejected NeuroSigma's appeal for higher payment other than 10. So they're currently at the $400 to $500 range. electroCore really is one of the earliest, not the earliest, pioneer in non-invasive neuromodulation. Raised an astounding $200 million over there, from inception, all the way through IPO, and have multiple indications, not only within pain, but outside of pain as well. And tremendous amount of resources spent on, this is already probably a year old, over 17 trials over the first 10 years, and over 2,000 patients that they've studied. and very well embraced by the neurology community. But unfortunately, and they have their own code for vagus nerve stimulation, non-invasively, the K1020. But unfortunately, CMS also rejected their appeal for higher payment amounts than 10. So that was certainly a big disappointment for electroCore. Thoronica, this is a real interesting story. Thoronica is kind of the hot new non-invasive device for the treatment of migraine. They pioneered a whole new approach called remote electrical neuromodulation. It's very good clinical data, and it's worn right here. And so, and in fact, it works so good that in their literature or their filings where it's like, you don't need it after 18 months. That's how well it works. Well, and here's a lesson that we can discuss later. Well, great that you only needed 18 months, but guess what? If you want to be durable medical equipment, you need to last 3 years, not a year and a half. So they really got screwed in the sense that no DME designation, no reimbursement whatsoever. So they were the big loser, at least right now from CMS perspective. And we'll talk about actually, in terms of, well, how often do payers follow CMS? Do you have any examples where CMS may be low, but overall the reimbursement for non-CMS is actually quite favorable. So that certainly would be an interesting discussion point. Cala Health turned out to be the big winner. So they got reimbursement at about $3,800. So it was like, whoa, this is a wrist stimulator. And they've done a great job getting it to market. And why do they have reimbursement at levels that are so much higher? And why didn't they get the TENS designation? And so certainly, in particular, Chris, interested in your perspective. You mentioned you're going to be actually with them tomorrow, the next day. So in part because, well, they have other bells and whistles. So from it, when you think about, developing your product, well, it's like, all right, what else can you put in there that's useful? Hopefully that is going to distinguish yourself as far away from TENS. They're also not going after a pain application. I don't know whether that has a bearing. Interested in your opinion there. And so they were the big winner in all of this. And then finally, this was kind of the most curious one. And Jim, maybe you can speak to this a little more, but Pear Therapeutics, which is software as medicine. And unfortunately, CMS really didn't buy their argument of software as medicine. And even though they have a HCPCS code assigned to them. So, and they're, pursuing many indications. And, they had at one point, multi-billion-dollar market cap there. Today, they're publicly traded on NASDAQ. I think when I last looked, about $330 million. So still, fantastic valuation, in part because distribution costs are next to zero, being just a software. So with that, and we're not going to just limit our discussion to non-invasive neuromodulation. We want to talk about implantables as well from a CMS and reimbursement perspective. And before we get into our discussion, Chris is going to come up, talk about his organization, and then Jim, and then we'll have a discussion around some of the issues, both on the implantable and non-invasive side. So Chris, please.
Can I speak out here? In front of this mic. If you want to use this mic, yeah. Is that okay? Yeah. Good. Thank you. I'll start with this: 55%. 55% of out of a survey from Stanford recently of medtech investors said that reimbursement was the #1 external threat to investing in a medical device. And I can tell you the remaining of those folks, they put in the top 3 were your clinical and your leadership team. We heard the VCs talk about that yesterday, reimbursement being 55%. My name is Chris Hanna. I have a medtech consulting firm. We focus on pre-commercial activities for medical devices and then post-commercial activities, specifically on new and innovative therapies that clearly want to get to market and make a change in the world. Don't do too much of the fast follower stuff. We like to have the innovation stuff. But when we talk about reimbursement, what I really want to leave you with is this. If you don't remember anything else that I say, there's 3 words I want you to remember when you think about reimbursement. It's coverage, coding, and payment. Just write those 3 things down and keep that in your mind when you're having reimbursement discussions. Most often, depending upon where you are in the evolution of a medical device, you may think reimbursement is one or the other or a third of one of those things, and all three are critically important. Okay, and let's talk about exactly what that means. Okay, coverage. Okay, coverage is the insurance decision. It's a clinical or a medical decision that they're actually going to pay for your therapy or not. They're making a go, no go decision on your therapy. Okay, all of that is determined by your clinical evidence completely. What you do is your primary endpoint, your inclusion exclusion criteria, all leads to your indication, which leads to a coverage policy. And that coverage might be a non-coverage policy. Okay, so we don't want to get down the path too far and then you get non-coverage. That's a very bad place to be. So when I think of coverage, it is clinical evidence, clinical evidence, clinical evidence. Okay, really, really important. Because if that doesn't work, if you get a negative coverage, the other two almost don't matter. Okay, and let's talk about coding. Coding are those codes. If you're not aware of it, I think everybody's aware of what coding is, but it's just the tens of thousands of codes that are assigned to procedures and devices to be able to process reimbursement claims, right? Without those codes, you're not going to get reimbursed, or your facility is not going to get reimbursed. And you have to okay. You have to look at your device. And when we look at Sana Health, right, that's more of the DME side of it, which would be what people call a HCPCS code, right? And then others like spinal cord stimulators are integrated into a delivery of a procedure, right? And those are CPT codes. And so you've got these two different paths. And so think of CPT as the procedure. Think of that P that's in there, that's the procedure. And then you have the device codes, okay? Two totally separate paths. And depending upon your situation, you might need both of those paths. So we've got coverage and we've got coding. The last piece is payment. So let's say you get through all of this stuff. And just like we hear with the external devices, the reimbursement's $300-400 and your device has a cost of goods sold or a COGS of $1,000. Doesn't really matter anymore now, does it? Right? It doesn't matter if you have positive coverage. It doesn't matter if you have codes, if the reimbursement is upside down for you. Keep in mind when you're thinking of reimbursement, and I do run into this quite a bit, is that they say, I'll talk with folks and they say, oh, the reimbursement's $1,000. They put that in their business plan. We can get $1,000 for this. Okay, what that really means is the hospital or ASC or whatever the facility is will get that $1,000. They need a profit margin, right? So then you've got to come in below that so they can make some money. Then you need a profit margin. Then you have cost of goods sold, you have cost of sales, you have R&D, sales and marketing, SG&A, you have all of those pieces that go into place. And if that entire food chain of money doesn't work for everybody, then it doesn't work for anybody. So keep that in mind when you're going through reimbursement. Everybody in the supply of healthcare has to make money, right? If they don't, if any one piece of that section does not make money, you're going to have a very difficult commercialization time. Okay, so we've got coverage. That's your go, no go. Do we believe this therapy is reasonable and necessary? And is it getting some good outcomes? That's the number one thing. That's your clinical evidence. That's usually where everything starts. And then secondly, do codes exist that are out there that adequately describe your therapy? And then lastly, what are the dollars that are associated with that? And does everybody make money along that entire continuum? Keep those three things in mind: coverage, coding, and payment. And I'm happy to talk with anybody afterwards about exactly what that means. But please, if you remember anything, that's the piece to do it. So now let's talk about what you need to do to get there and what it's going to take. This is the hard part to say, is that depending upon which of those three, if it's all three and it's a new and innovative therapy, plan on 3 to 5 years to get through that entire process. It is a very, very long process. And that all assumes that you have really good clinical outcomes. If you have marginal clinical outcomes, it makes it a little bit longer as you're trying to convince people. And you can go down the Medicare route and or the private payer route, or skip all of that and go to the VA and do out-of-pocket costs, which we all know isn't the most scalable solution for a medical device company. And so CMS really drives really what the private payers are going to do. If CMS says no, private payers typically say no as well. They just follow suit. And think about that. It takes a lot of energy to put together a policy. And so if somebody else has already done that work, we just adopt that policy. It's a lot cheaper. So if CMS has done that policy, they're going to follow that policy, especially if it's negative. They like to do that. Okay. And so I just wanted to share that. My company helps in all aspects of that. You can go and read about my company and what we do. The last piece I'll leave you with is political stuff. So when you get in post-commercial, it's not like you got your coverage, coding, and payment and things just stop. There's constant evolution of healthcare in this country, constant, and it's moving from fee for service, right, which is volume-based healthcare, to health economics. Jojo touched on that a little bit. I appreciate that last little bit you threw in there about health economics. That's where things are trying to go, which is improving overall outcomes, value healthcare, not volume to value-based healthcare. That's a transition that the government's moving toward, and there are incentives and disincentives if you don't start moving toward value-based outcomes. And that's really important. And so making yourself present in those meetings, in those sessions with Congress, with HHS, with CMS, with Medical Device Manufacturers Association, that's where all of those things are discussed and where you can get insight as to where things are going so you can adapt your model to work within the new value-based system. I can tell you it's a generational shift, right? So it's not going to be tomorrow. It'll be decades as this evolves to that situation. And the thing I'll say to that is if you are not at the table when it comes to healthcare in this country, you are on it. Okay, if you're not at the table being heard, talking like Kala, and you heard these other folks, they are there appealing, they are fighting. Kala was successful. If you're not at the table, you're on it. Somebody else will get that money. There's only so much to go around. It'll go to the people who are talking the most and the loudest. So keep that in mind. So lastly, coverage, coding, and payment. And at the end of the day, if you're not at the table, you're on it. Just remember those 4 things when you go back. Thank you.
Great job, Chris. My gosh, tough act to follow. So very nice job. Thanks for inviting me to attend. This is, I love this meeting, and this location is great, and Jim does a great job every year.
Oh, thank you, Jim. I appreciate that.
So I just wanted to give you a little bit of my background, just so you know where I'm coming from. My background is a PhD in neurophysiology. I did 2 postdoctoral fellowships in academia, and then I went, and then I went into industry, where I have been doing neuromodulation research for about 25 years. And I've worked on many projects at many companies. I've done spinal cord stimulation extensively, deep brain stimulation, peripheral nerve stimulation, among other things. So I have quite a bit of experience watching these, these processes go through out to commercialization. So I've worked for a number of companies: Boston Scientific, Advanced Bionics. I was employee number 7 at Nevro, employee number 5 at Nalu Medical, and I was recently founder at Restalsis Health. And so I've worked, and out of those, 5 of those are startup companies that I've worked for. So had a great opportunity to see how things work from very early stage in most cases. And so I guess the most important message I want to leave you with is I'm not an expert on reimbursement. Chris is the expert. I just picked up a few things along the way, seeing this process evolve. All right, so you've all seen this, I'm sure, a number of times, the valley of death in the startup world. We often get caught in focusing on FDA, where everything's about getting that FDA clearance, getting that approval for commercialization. But you need to be planning for commercialization from day one. You need to be thinking about what codes you're going to be using. Are you falling under the existing codes, or do you need to get your own code? That's critical. This is what Chris was hammering on, and I can't emphasize enough. Be thinking about all 3 of these. These are, each one is a hurdle in and of itself. So yeah, don't be caught in just thinking, once I get the code, I'm golden. You need to get, in Kala's example, they got it, but you need to get a payment that you can run a business with. And this is sort of getting in a little bit into the nuts and bolts, because I'll be talking about this, I'm sure, when you guys start asking questions. But this is a CPT code for the spinal cord stimulation IPG implant, and it's what we refer to as the clinical vignette. And so so if you want to use this code for your device and you're developing a spinal cord stimulation platform, you need to, the procedure code needs to follow this almost to a letter. So I've highlighted some yellow sections where just describing the actual steps that the physician takes, because that's what you're getting paid for. You're getting paid for the physician work. And so you need to think about all these steps in your, if you're developing an SCS device or whatever device it is, get the clinical vignette, very early stage, think about what your device configuration is going to be, and what your procedure is going to be. Otherwise, you'll be sorely concerned at the very end of your development process. Okay, that's it for me. And now back to Jeremy.
So Jim, well, I'll have you up here. Can you talk a little bit about, because you've been involved in a lot of early stage companies, just in general, about integration of reimbursement considerations in the product development life cycle. How early is early that you've seen from a real life experience, and then perhaps your recommendation?
Yeah, so not everybody, not everybody listened to me when I was at these companies early on, and back in the days of Nevro, we didn't really think about it until we were pretty far down the road. However, my most recent experience, my last two companies I've worked at, we looked at it day one. We brought in reimbursement consultants. We had them, every step of the way in terms of the product configuration, in terms of what the procedure was. We went to the cadaver lab, working through the steps. Does it follow the vignette? We already decided that we wanted to go with existing codes and not get our own code. But you could go the other path, but bear in mind that getting your own code is, as Chris said, is 3 to 5 years. And that's after FDA clearance, 3 to 5 years. That's a long road. So you want to try, most people try to fit it into some existing codes. And we did that very early on. With, as I said, with consultants and also with physicians who are savvy on reimbursement. There are a lot of doctors out there who are very, very commercially minded. And so work with them as well to understand how your device is going to fit in the reimbursement world.
So Chris, Nevro. So Nevro, some features that were unique in terms of the high rate stimulation, entered an existing market. Can you talk about, if you're kind of trying to piggyback, what obstacles might you find, such as if you're the next Nevro into an existing, in this case, SES market from a reimbursement perspective?
Sure. Can I stand up and speak? There was talk earlier about being a fast follower versus new therapies, and there are pros and cons to both, and there's motivators for pros and cons. So you had the big three in the past, and then you had Nevro come on with high frequency, and they got what's called a pass-through payment. So we'll talk about breakthrough in just a moment, but they got a pass-through payment, which allowed them to really make some headway. And they were trying to get to a higher payment classification. It didn't happen, but their customers were able to get a little bit extra reimbursement, which was really, really important from that pass-through perspective. And then Saluda, with their closed loop system, just got to get breakthrough or pass-through. Who knows? Saluda. Pass-through. That's what I thought. And so they just got pass-through payment, which will enable them to do the same thing. So for those who are doing new and innovative therapies from a reimbursement perspective, there's the breakthrough program. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then for those who are, I would call it fast followers, who don't qualify per breakthrough, you have the pass-through payment in the outpatient setting. And then actually, if you're doing an inpatient therapy, there's an add-on payment that you can apply for. So there are processes that are there, or vehicles that are there to help make sure you get reimbursement for some of these therapies. You just have to be aware of them, that they're out there, and then know how to apply for them to try to get that extra reimbursement.
Since you're already up there, can you talk a little bit about what breakthrough designation is, and also where you see it?
Yeah, breakthrough, for those of you familiar with breakthrough, it's for those life-saving, life-changing therapies that there are no other alternatives for. There's a bunch of little criteria in there, but basically brand new innovative therapies that can be life-changing for folks. What I'd say from that perspective, that was proposed in the last administration, put into place. Breakthrough was going forward in the current administration. Part of it was repealed out of CMS perspective, and now there's dedication to moving that forward again. For those of you who are interested in where that's going very specifically, you've got comment period that's open until December 20th of this year. If you go find me on LinkedIn, I've posted a link to exactly what the new proposal is for the TSIT program, which is breakthrough. Look at that and you can get some information and see exactly how you can comment on that. There'll be some open meetings in December to discuss those. So CMS is committed to moving the breakthrough program forward. But here's the issue. Okay, just so you understand, there was a bunch of detailed issues that are there, but if I were to summarize it this way, it'd be this. FDA, when they're looking at your clinical evidence, is to prove safety and efficacy, right? Okay, CMS wants reasonable and necessary. Just by that fact right there, that there are two different definitions, that must mean they want different clinical information, which they do. Safety and efficacy, call it about this level of evidence. Reasonable and necessary is this level of evidence. How do you now bridge those two in one policy, which is what breakthrough is? And CMS didn't like what FDA was doing and saying, we'll just give you this coverage. And CMS went, well, wait 1 second, that's our purview. You don't get to do that. So they repealed that piece to it. So right now there are some very good value benefits to it. Without a doubt, the breakthrough program is very, very valuable. But the real valuable part is what Jim was talking about, is that valley of death, that 3 to 5 years where you don't have reimbursement. That's the part that kills you. And I've seen way too many fail in that area. So with that perspective, now CMS is dedicated to making sure that FDA is looking at reasonable and necessary at the same time. Right. What that means for you is, as you go to FDA and you do your Q-sub meetings and you have these discussions, you can imagine CMS wanting to be there and saying, hey, I want you to start putting in some metrics on reasonable and necessary. So now you can imagine that even though that'll help you through the valley of death, now you've got to talk to your investors. While you might have to include a few more people in your clinical study, a few more data points, which might take a little bit more time. I don't know what that might look like. Each one's different, but you can imagine now you're shifting some of that up front, some of that risk up front and cost up front to get through the valley of death. And I think that's a really, really good thing. And I know CMS is committed to moving that forward next year.
Great. So Jim, in your real life experiences across those companies, did you describe a little bit of in terms of when you approached CMS? Did you design your clinical trials with reimbursement considerations at the time, or just FDA? Let's start with those two.
So we follow the existing vignette, the existing codes. And so we didn't need to approach CMS to get any kind of approval. So it fell perfectly in line with coding, coverage, and payment, the way Chris said. So it wasn't an issue in that case. Obviously, if we were going for a new code, it would have been a different story, or a new reimbursement path.
And then to both of you, what about the importance of working with societies and getting the physician community to support your reimbursement efforts?
I can't overstate the importance of physician society engagement. When you go to the CPT panel, so if you're looking for a procedure, you're going to the CPT panel, right? Remember, P is that procedure. The CPT panel is run by the American Medical Association, which is a group of physicians, okay? The people on the panel are physicians. They want to hear from the physician societies that would have oversight into that therapy. So spinal cord stimulators, NANS, ASIP, those folks. If they agree that this is a good therapy to approve for a device or for a CPT code, they will support it, right? If they're not there or not supporting it, you're not going to get through the CPT panel. They have requirements which are called widespread usage, right? For them to put in a new CPT code, they want to know that it's being widespread used. If the societies aren't supporting it, it's not going to be widespread used. So why would they want to go through the trouble of creating a code that nobody is using the therapy? So that you kind of see where that's going. So if societies aren't supporting you from that perspective, you have a really difficult problem. What I try to do is we get as high a level KOLs, the key opinion leaders within those societies, as part of our principal investigators within our trials, so that they have firsthand use of it. They have that emotional buy-in into it, and they're helping promote it out there to others who will listen and get them to speak at society meetings. So NANS, ASIP, you see that all the time, getting those folks having those conversations. The society piece, I can't tell you how important that is. That to me is the most important element to it, whether you're going device side or whether you're going procedure side. Without the society support, who are your customers, if they're not supporting it, then you've got a real big problem.
So,
So,
Jim,
yeah.
go
let me-
ahead.
Let me just add one thing. So it's really, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that the physician is 100% dedicated to supporting your product. Because if there's the slightest bit of doubt, they think, well, maybe this it's not the right market or not the right whatever, then you're going to be in trouble. They need to be 100% on board with everything you're doing with regard to that device and that procedure.
So last question, this is Jim, before you see if there's questions in the audience. So the companies that you've been at were, and for the most part, where you were following existing reimbursement pathways, but did you have any reimbursement challenges along the way? What were the pitfalls and how did you overcome those pitfalls?
The hardest part is the configuration of the device and the procedure. We all want to make our procedures as minimally invasive as possible, as fast as possible, as these are the things we want to do, and you can't necessarily have that if you want to follow existing codes. You need to make sure you have all the steps in that vignette in your published procedure, and so that to me was the hardest part, because everybody wants to make everything easier and faster, but you can't always do that and get paid properly.
So were there instances then where you went in one direction, even though perhaps it wasn't optimal from a product design or from a patient outcome perspective? Did you make those type of trade-offs?
The patient outcome was not an issue, but there were a lot of hard decisions we had to make to make sure that we fell within the vignette. Like I said, it's all about the vignette. And if you're making it faster, cheaper, shorter, whatever, it's not gonna help you in the reimbursement world. You're gonna need to get your own code.
Yeah, great points. Let's take some questions. We have a few more minutes. Questions? Yes. Oh, wait. Oh, thank you. Oh,
Now I want to ask a question. Who raised their hand?
So my question is in the context of the transition, albeit slow, from fee-for-service to value-based. From a device life perspective, you have this kind of tug of war that says, we get longer device life, X years. But from a commercial perspective, it benefits the company if the device gets replaced in a shorter period of time. The clinician replacing it also gets, the benefit in a fee-for-service environment. So how do you see that playing out in the next, 3 to 5 years as it pertains to claims on device life and, the promotion versus the reality?
That's Chris for sure.
Couple of things come to mind when I just heard you say that is baby steps. And what I mean by that is that when I'm working with companies and we look at, hey, we can change the standard of care, we can save the system, all of this money, I'd say exactly who in that system are you saving money for, right? Because those are the ones who really want to move it forward. But if it's not the physicians, they're not prescribing it, right? And so you still have to, what I say, keep the lights on. So the fee for service, that has to be there. People still have businesses to run and the entire system's built on fee for service. And as we evolve, we go to the value-based outcomes. So that is when I meet with Congress and HHS, and we try to implement policies that incentivize people to move to that direction. So quality metrics that are in place for physicians, that if they're in hospitals, if they're not reporting their quality metrics, their reimbursement starts to go down by 5%, right? And if they are being reported, then they go up. And then you have the transparency laws are saying, here are the quality of these hospital systems, and kind of like the Yelp for hospitals. That transparency is critically important to try to get to move people more to that value-based outcome. So as we were talking earlier, it's like a generational change. It's going to happen over a very, very long period of time because the entire system is built on fee for service. But the more you can work with HMOs like Kaiser on showing how you can save money within a closed loop system, very, very valuable. VA is kind of the same way, TRICARE kind of the same way. There are different options to go where they're motivated to see more of the value-based outcomes. Yeah.
Okay, I'm stealing the next question. Sorry.
All right, Jim.
So Chris, this is for you. In the course of doing the article that Jeremy mentioned, we interviewed an executive from Kala.
From where?
From Kala Health.
Oh, okay.
Because we were interested to get there, and it was on the record, so there's nothing secret about what they said. But something that was very important in the CMS decision, they made reference to a reimbursement consultant that Kala Health had hired as having an influence on their decision. And so I asked this executive from Kala, who was that reimbursement consultant? And they were willing to answer the question. They just couldn't remember the name of the person. Do you happen to know who was their reimbursement consultant?
I do not.
Okay.
But I will be with Cala Health tomorrow
Aha,
in DC. With those executives, I'll ask that question.
okay.
And see where exactly they're headed. I know there's some discussion around exactly what their final reimbursement dollars are going to be. Which, as we heard earlier, is critically important to the external neurostimulation
Yes.
space. Absolutely critical. That is one of the most important companies to follow. They've decided to put the millions in investment into fighting CMS's ruling of what's called a crosswalk to a TENS device. Crosswalk, keep that in mind. And they're fighting that crosswalk behavior. So if anybody's interested in hearing our conversations tomorrow, give me your business card. I'll be happy to do a small email distribution list and give you an update of where Cala is
I
tomorrow.
would be interested.
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
So
I'm
what
sure many of us are.
passes the time. Chris, what can Veronica and Electrocor do, given where their situation is today? Veronica with no reimbursement and Electrocor with the 10 reimbursement. Can they get out of it?
Oh, man.
Sorry.
It's this is when I get the alligator arms, like when the check is here to pick. I'm like, I can't reach that. It's this is where so I do a lot of work with MDMA, Medical Device Manufacturers Association. Here's what I would say to that. You've got to start bringing, it's kind of like if somebody in the middle says no, we'll go to somebody who has the power to say yes, right? And so CMS reports to HHS, HHS reports to Congress, go to Congress. Medical Device Manufacturers Association for medical device companies who aren't profitable, who are pre-market, $500 a year, you get full access to their lobbyists. You can go to all of their meetings. I highly, highly, highly recommend that you join MDMA. You get access to all of their lobbyists, their weekly meetings, their reimbursement meetings, updates on all of this. Tomorrow is the meeting in DC on where policy is going as a result of the midterms tonight. Cala is going to be there talking about their therapy. So in that situation, what I do and why I do all the political work that I do is then if you get stuck in that situation, we then put strategies together with your Congress members and other Congress people and subcommittees on health. So the Doc Caucus and the House Ways and Means Committee, we work with them to start calling over to HHS and CMS going, why exactly are you doing what you're doing? And if we have to, then we ask them to get subpoenaed to congressional meetings to answer of exactly why they're stifling innovation by doing a continual crosswalk to a low reimbursed TENS device when we've clearly gone beyond that.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, fascinating topic. Thank you for this panel. So I have a pharma background and I apologize. I'm sure this is a really naive question. Maybe the first part of the question is across the neurotech field, would you say that devices are generally appropriately reimbursed or under reimbursed? And then maybe the more nuanced part of the question is, where would you see the biggest gap between strong clinical evidence and lack of appropriate reimbursement?
Oh my goodness. I'm going to stay so I can see you. I would say a decade ago for devices, it was kind of upside down. We need you on. So when I was working with firms, there was a lot of discussion around reimbursement. Now there's so many folks will say in SCS that it's competition that's driving the prices down, not reimbursement. So actually there's great reimbursement from that perspective. It kind of begets greed. And I start seeing huge profit margins that people are now building economic models on that, in my opinion, are unsustainable. What I see happening is, remember, coverage, coding, and payment. So CMS has those three triggers, right? And they have those three levers. I am seeing restriction in coverage policies. Peripheral nerve stimulation is going through that right now, a drastic reduction in covered indications for peripheral nerve stimulation. I can tell you they're probably doing it because they feel like it's growing too much and they have that trigger they can pull. Coding is a little bit harder to do anything on, but if I do non-coverage for certain indications, I just shut the whole thing down. We got the final ruling for 2023 on the hospital outpatient setting. The conversion factor has gone down for physicians. Talk to anybody in CMS, they'll tell you, you control the physician, you control the cost. Because if I reduce the payment for the cost for doing, we'll say, a spinal cord stimulator, and now it all of a sudden doesn't make any sense to me, I just saved $30,000 because they're no longer prescribing that procedure. So now I didn't have to do anything over here. I controlled the prescriber's behavior. So they're doing those things. And then you have reimbursement. So they'll start lowering the dollars associated with the reimbursement. So there are other triggers that are out there that they can pull to affect slowing the growth in certain therapies down. So that's where I see that you have to continually monitor this. And I say, you've got to be at the table all the time, or you're going to end up on it and you're going down, everything's looking great. And all of a sudden a policy comes in and you don't have the time to react to it. So being very aware of that. And then you said a clinical study. That is a real good detailed question that I have a feeling we're running over. And how about I just talk to you about that right after this?
So we have one last question from the CEO of NeuroSigma.
Yeah, so quickly, I know time is limited. Yeah, I'm the CEO of NeuroSigma, so I just went through this whole CMS process and obviously did not get the answer that we were hoping for. Last week, I was at the MedTech conference in Boston, and I actually spoke, or was that last week? I've been traveling so much, but anyway, I spoke with one of the senior representatives at CMS. And I think from my perspective, the most disappointing thing about that conversation was that this morning, NeuroSigma announced that we are enrolling in 2 separate large double-blind randomized controlled trials for our lead therapy, 375 kids. And I said, look, I know the data set that we presented at first, we got 82 subjects plus an open label, you know, whatever. But if I come back to you with this more robust, you know, hundreds of kids data set in a couple of years, are you willing to reconsider? Really isn't for us. It's the statutory language around the technology itself. And you did not convince that this is a sufficiently new technology that I should not crosswalk you to a TENS unit. Thought number one. Thought number two, which is quicker, is I think in some ways the most disappointing thing about the decision that Kayla got reimbursement, but that Kayla got reimbursement at $3,800, which is basically 10 times you're allowing NeuroSigma. So I don't think, you know, we're going to keep fighting, keep pushing. We're enrolling 370. I think we're going to win eventually, but it has been a battle, and I would love to talk with you more. I'd be happy to.
All right, thank you very much.
It's great.
So Jim wants the last word, 15 seconds.
No, I don't want the last word. I just want to say oh, sorry. Go ahead. 15 seconds, Jim.
I did want to comment on NeuroSigma CEO. I'm sorry, don't know your name. So one of the take home messages for me with the whole TENS thing where everything gets crosswalked to TENS is you need to be thinking very early on how to distance yourself from TENS. If you are a class 2 wearable neuromod device, you're likely going to be, they're going to want to crosswalk you into TENS. So at day one, think, okay, how am I going to avoid being crosswalked to TENS? And so be thinking about that. And everything you write, all your internal documents, all your external documents, don't use TENS. This is just like TENS. Don't want to say that. You want to say it's new technology, and what are the attributes that are different from TENS is what you want to emphasize.
Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Jeremy. We could have easily done another hour on this session, but great talk. Chris, Jim, thanks very much.